Thank you. I know we are reading Parshat Emor this week, but I wanted to focus on the phrase Kiddoshim Tihiyu, which is in last week's portion, although the word Kadosh is found so many times throughout the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. And the Ahavah, which we studied last week, is part of Parshat Kiddoshim, where we're told right at the outset, Vayidaber Adonai o Moshe lemor, the Lord spoke to Moshe saying, Daber el kol adat b'nei Israel, speak to the entire congregation of Israel. V'yomarta alehem, and say to them, Kiddoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, you shall be holy. God says, Ki kadosh, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. But the mandate is Kiddoshim tihiyu. So what I'd like to do now is to speak straight for about 10, no more, I hope, than 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up. And I want to say a word about holiness. What does holiness mean? It's a term which we often read about, we talk about, and here is the mandate, Kiddoshim tihiyu. So our goal now is to offer, by the way, I don't see Arnie on, so I'm concerned a little bit. Hope Arnie is okay. But
Rabbi, I actually
yes.
just noticed also. I'm going to reach out to him.
Okay. So Kiddoshim tihiyu, I'd like to offer two interpretations. The first interpretation of Kadosh, which is fundamental, it's basic, although there are many who would see this as a kind of dry type of interpretation. I don't see Ted and Bev either, by the way, but maybe they're busy with something else today. One interpretation of Kadosh is, believe it or not, separate yourself, distinguish yourself through a separation. Now, if one looks at it that way, then the mandate to the Jewish people, and this is a very collective, general mandate. Let me step back for a second, because this chapter 19 in Leviticus is a very central chapter, because it includes so many dictums and so many mandates about interpersonal relationships. We studied last week one of the central ones of the Ahavah l'reacha kamocha, and Jessica beautifully mentioned another, lo tikom v'lo titor. And there are quite a few of them here. We could spend a year, 2 years just studying all these mandates, but it begins kind of, I guess if we were writing a book on this chapter, the name of the book would be Kiddoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Then you open up the book and you look at the table of the index of the chapters, and you would have, within Kiddoshim tihiyu, you would have specific mandates, v'chulu. But what does Kiddoshim tihiyu? And one understanding of Kiddoshim tihiyu is separate yourself, distinguish yourself. Now, the term kadosh, let me give you and suggest the clearest example of how Kiddoshim could mean separation. Marriage. Marriage in Judaism, in halakha, has 2 steps. The wedding service begins with what is called the kiddushin, which is from the word kadosh. In Aramaic, it's called also the erusin, kiddushin, and that is the betrothal, that's the commitment ceremony. As a matter of fact, that commitment ceremony in Talmudic times, in the time of the Gemara in ancient times, that actually, maybe not ancient, but a couple thousand years ago, that actually took place an entire year before the nuptials. The nuptials is the second part of the ceremony, and that is called nisu'in, or in the Bible, it's likuchin. Nisu'in, from the word nasa, in marriage, when engaging in and committing oneself to such a relationship, then there is a lifting of each other. The parties, bride, groom, partners, they lift each other to new heights. Those are the two pieces of the ceremony, but it begins with the kiddushin. And today, by the way, the next time you're at a wedding, you'll see that both those ceremonies today take place right near each other. There was a time they were separated by an entire year. First, the kiddushin, the betrothal, and a year later, the erusin. And the kiddushin is a commitment. Perhaps I've mentioned this to you before. It meant that the parties were husband and wife, except they didn't live together. That was a year later in the nisuin. Then husband and wife moved in with each other. If there was a separation in that 1 year period, although they didn't even live with each other, and presumably there was no intimacy, there still has to be a get, there still has to be a Jewish divorce. But if you look closely at the next time you're at a wedding ceremony, you'll see, and even not only in Orthodox circles, but in conservative and in reform, you'll see that there are two ceremonies under the chuppah. You could see that there are two times we say a blessing over the wine. We always begin such joyous ceremonies with a blessing over wine. So we begin with the blessing of wine, and then the blessings about the commitment, and then the drinking of wine and the giving of the ring. The giving of the ring is not the wedding, it's not the nuptials, it's the betrothal. And then to demarcate that they're two separate ceremonies, there's a talk that is given, or we read the ketubah, the marital document. And then soon after, we say another blessing over wine. Why? Because this is the blessing related to the nuptials, and that's the Sheva Brachot. That's the 7 blessings. The 7 blessings really is the nuptials, and it's followed by a few moments of Yichud, when the bride and groom spend some private time with each other, symbolic that now they're fully entering into the marital union. Now, the word kiddushin could be looked upon as in the following way, that bride and groom, when they enter into the betrothal, they are separating themselves from all others and saying, we are committing ourselves to each other. And in that sense, we commit ourselves to each other with a faithfulness, with a fidelity, and we are committing ourselves to separate from all others in the way that we are now coming together. Or let me explain this even more. One of the most beautiful parts of the ceremony takes place before the betrothal. It's not done in all weddings, but I think it's a beautiful part. It's called badeking. And the badeking is a Yiddish word which means to cover. Some people think that badeking is a Hebrew word from the word bidika, to investigate. And many people think it has to do with when Jacob made the mistake and he thought he was marrying Rachel and he was marrying Leah. So some people think that what that ceremony is about, right before they even march to the canopy, bride and groom look at each other and they're badeking, they're investigating. He's making sure, it's Rachel, it's not Leah. And I guess she's also making sure it's the right man. But the truth of the matter, it has nothing to do with that. Badeking is not a Hebrew word, it's a Yiddish word, and it means to cover. And the meaning of that covering fundamentally is that in the Bible, whenever a woman covered her face, talk about what's going on in Afghanistan today, the covering of the face, the covering of the head, that was a statement of that the marriage was soon to take place. And so, for example, I would say the badeking takes us back not to Rachel and Leah, but to Rivka, to Rebecca. When Rebecca sees Isaac, we're told in chapter 24, she immediately Breshit, of Genesis, she covers her face. Now, I think it has different interpretations today. That's the power of ritual. The power of ritual is that what it originally meant, it could evolve and to mean something else. So yes, that ceremony, which is before the actual betrothal, followed actual time when bride and groom are standing under the chuppah. This is generally done in another room, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, sometimes not at all, but it's a beautiful custom. I think what it also means is that, well, let me say just this, and just on the side, when you love someone, what do? You symbolize that love by trying to protect that person. So you love that person by, for example, that which we love, we cover. We cover the Shabbat table, we cover the Shabbat chalot, we cover the ark with the beautiful curtain. And if I love you, deeply love you, I want to protect you and I cover you. And at night, if my beloved is uncovered, I'm going to cover my beloved if one is so blessed. As a matter of fact, so covering is the way that badeking of bride and groom ritually, symbolically saying to each other, we're here to love each other, to give each other space, but to protect each other. And I've often felt that the hardest moment, I'm jumping now, but just to show you how this covering ritual is all expansive and really inclusive, one of the toughest time moving from marriage to burial, one of the toughest moments of burial is when the person who has died is placed in the ground and then the dirt, you hear the thumping of the dirt on the coffin. It's frightening. I'm generally not at a cemetery because I'm a Kohen, but one can be and should be at the burial of one's parents. And when my father was buried, I was so overwhelmed by the moment. I almost went into the grave with my father. My siblings had to pull me out. And what got me through it is I had a different image of what was happening, that it wasn't that we were throwing dirt on the coffin. Actually, in Israel, they don't even use a coffin. It's not that we were throwing dirt, shoveling dirt on someone. The dirt wasn't dirt. It was soil. It was earth. It was God's earth. There's a difference between dirt and earth and soil. And it wasn't the throwing of dirt, but it was taking the soil and gently, I actually sprinkled a little bit on my father right at the outset. And I began to see it almost like a blanketing, like softly tucking my father into the earth. Now, of course, no person who is alive, who's breathing, wants to be tucked in by having dirt placed upon them. But as my very dear friend Joel Simon says, he's at Riverside, he always reminds us, he says, in Judaism, we do not bury human beings. We bury bodies, not people. The body that's being buried is a body. It's not the person. The soul is not there. And even if you don't believe in the soul, the organs that are functioning, the heart, the lungs, they're not there. It's the body. We give great respect to the body because the body, it was the vessel of the soul, of the heart and of the lungs, and the body itself is probably God's greatest artistic creation. And the body is to be sanctified, talking about Kedusha. So I looked at that covering as tucking somebody in whom I love, the final covering, and that's why, by the way, the shovel in the beginning is inverted. The earth is taken on the back side of the shovel, and gently the earth slips down. As a matter of fact, so that it's clear we're not shoveling dirt on someone, no one hands the shovel to anyone else. The shovel, after one has done a little bit of the covering, is staked into the ground. It's not like moving quickly. It's a very different phenomenon. But I wasn't interested in that for our discussion. What I'm interested in is that another interpretation of the badeking, going back to the wedding of the covering. So we've said, just to summarize, that the badeking, the covering of the bride, is this is really what it's about. In biblical times, the covering of the face, that was, as in with Rebecca, also Tamar, that was her intention, maybe not Judah's. The covering of the face is the symbol of that commitment of marriage. Secondly, we've spoken about the covering of the face, this badeking, also as a symbol of bride and groom saying to each other, we're going to protect each other. We're going to be there for each other. But I love a third interpretation, and that is often, a bride and groom struggle between, on the one hand, what's happening is a very public ceremony. There could be 10, there could be 20, there could be 100, there could be 150, there could be 200 people present. There could be, at some weddings, 500 people present and more, who knows? And a bride and groom, they've often shared with me, I don't know if I remember all the way back, it's 57 years for us, but often it's the case that a bride and groom need some private moments in the midst of that whole hullabaloo. And I'm just wondering whether the badeking is in the midst of all that's happening and everyone is standing around. Bride and groom look into each other's eyes as the veil is lifted. And it's just the two of them whispering love notes to each other. And they're saying to each other the following: my eyes are for you the way they are for no one else. My eyes are for you the way they are for no one else. And in that sense, the badeking is very much in the spirit of kiddushin, to separate. God says, separate yourself, be distinct, be apart, in that no matter the world, and all one has to do is watch the news, and I read the New York Post, I read it backwards, I read it for the sports section, but if you read it from the front, it's so disheartening. My goodness, they had a front page story today about some policeman, his wife was having an affair, so he runs, he kills the lover. It's like these crazy, wild stories. God says, Kiddoshim you, try, do what you can to separate yourself and lead an ethical life. And I want to leave you, having given you this interpretation of Kadosh. And by the way, take, for example, the laws of kashrut. This may shock some of you, but the reason for kashrut in the Torah is not a health reason. It's not don't eat swine because of trichinosis. Maybe it has those positives on the side, but when it comes, for example, to kashrut, the reason given for kashrut is, and you shall be holy. And as a matter of fact, eating kosher could separate ourselves from much of the world that doesn't eat kosher. I leave for you to think about, well, if it means to separate ourselves and what's followed are certain laws about ethical behavior, well then, does Judaism in the Torah, does it offer a sense of social justice, of ethics, which is distinct from other presentations of social justice? Let's not talk about the New York Post front page. Let's talk about people who live ethical lives. Is the Jewish sense of ethics, are there differences between a Jewish approach to ethics, to that kiddusha, that separation, or is it all the same? And I believe there are distinctions, and I want to leave out there what would be those distinctions. So that is one way of understanding Kedoshim to you. Separate yourself, be distinct, be apart. If I say that this pen is going to be dedicated to Kedusha, I'm dedicating $5, $10, $18 to the synagogue. That money is kadosh. I can use it for no other purpose. In ancient times, when I would dedicate a book, when I would dedicate whatever I'm dedicating to the temple, then it was separated. It could not be used for any other purpose. That's one approach, but I want to offer a second approach. I know that was a bit lengthy. And this, I believe, from all that I've seen in Nachmanides and Ramban from the 13th century, and this is just one of his 5 volumes, I believe what I'm about ready to present to you is probably the most important commentary Ramban makes on all of the Torah. So on Kedoshim Tihiyu, you shall be holy, he begins by quoting Rashi, what we've just reported. And he quotes Rashi, abstain from the forbidden sexual relationships mentioned in the preceding section and from other sin. Because wherever you find in the Torah warning to guard against immorality, you find the mention of holiness. This is Rashi's language. And that's Rashi's interpretation, because Jessica, the chapter 18 talks about inappropriate sexual relationships. Kedoshim to you, separate yourself, be apart. Now, I want to read to you what Ramban says. This is the English translation. This is the way Ramban understands. These are his words, Kedoshim to you. Here's what he says, quote, the Torah has admonished us against immorality and forbidden foods, but permitted sexual intercourse between man and his wife, husband and wife, and the eating of certain meat and wine. So the Torah, what he's saying is, has warned us against immorality and forbidden foods, but it obviously permits, it promotes, it encourages intimacy, and it encourages that we eat properly. Now, listen closely to this next sentence, my dear, dear friends whom I love. If so, a person of desire could consider this to be a permission to be passionately addicted to intimacy, actually it's sexual intercourse with one's spouse, and be among wine bibbers. I could be drinking kosher wine. I could be eating kosher food, but I could be a drunk, and I could be overeating and gluttonous eaters of flesh. I could do that. I could do this, and maybe speak freely all profanities. Maybe there are profanities that I could use, since this prohibition has not been expressly mentioned in the Torah. So what he's saying is that, wait a minute, he's offering a very different interpretation. He's saying that a person can follow the nitty-gritty of Jewish law and yet be acting inappropriately. The Torah forbids certain sexual relationships, but permits, of course. There are areas of permissibility. The Torah forbids certain foods, but it permits foods and it permits wine. And thus, these are his words, I'm back quote, a person can become a sorted person within the permissible realm of the Torah. That's a kind of hard translation. The Hebrew is, one could be a naval birshut haTorah. Wow. I see Vivian is nodding. One could be repugnant with the permission of the Torah. One could be an abomination with the permission of the Torah. And this is the way he understands Kedoshim Tihiyu. He understands Kedoshim Tihiyu to mean, let me say it, Likadesh et hamutar. That Kedusha, holiness, doesn't mean to separate from that which is inappropriate. It doesn't deal with that which is forbidden. It deals rather with that which is permissible. And what he's saying is, there are two ways to engage in actions that are permissible. There is a way to engage in those actions in a way which is not holy, and there is a way to sanctify the permissible. Likadesh et hamutar, likadesh, to sanctify et hamutar, that which is permissible. To take that which is permissible. Now I'm talking to myself, letting you listen because I've gained too much weight. And wait a minute, you gotta sanctify the process. You gotta eat properly. One has to engage in relationships in an appropriate way. Those words, if you'll say them with me, likadesh et hamuta, likadesh et hamuta, to sanctify the permissible. So I want to say it this way. I could open this up and ask you, what do you consider to be holy? When I ask this question, or when I've asked myself, when I asked of others, what is to be holy? A lot of people would say, well, you know what it is to be holy? To be holy is on Yom Kippur, I'm coming into synagogue, and I see the ark is covered by a white covering, and the cantor and the rabbi, they're wearing a white garment, and Gewalt, that's holiness. That's holiness. Nothing to do with me. No. That's not the ultimate meaning of holiness. Holiness is it's not only the way I conduct myself when I fast. It's not only the way I conduct myself when I pray. It's not only the way I conduct myself when I meditate, but everything has the capacity to become holy. The way one eats, the way one drinks, the way one conducts oneself in business, the way one interacts with one's fellow person, the way one does all of that, that has the potential to be holy. We've often quoted Rabbi Cook. It pays to think about this line. He used to say, there's no such thing as the holy and the unholy. There is only the holy and the not yet holy. That is the way Nachmanides understands Kedoshim Tihiyu. You know, I was talking to a dear friend yesterday. Perhaps he's listening in, I'm not sure, Rabbi Moshe Edelman. And we were talking a lot about the halachic system. And he said to me, you know, that he has met people, Orthodox people, who are very halachic. They'll follow the nitty-gritty of each of the lines of the Jewish law. And they're halachically all there. They do the halachic thing. But on a human level, there's something missing. And what's missing is Kedoshim Tihiyu. That's what's missing. And that really, what I've just shared with you, is the basis of what I've often said throughout my 50 years of the rabbinate. Somebody comes to the synagogue and says, oh, the shul is not for me. You're an Orthodox shul. That's not for me. I'm not a religious person. And I truly think a person could be deeply religious. If you're leading an ethical life, you could be religious. If you're leading a sanctified life, you could be religious without being ritually observant. And by the way, you could be observant and not be religious. Very, very possible. That's what Rabbi Edelman was saying. You could be halachic, and there's something missing in the human dimension. And so the Torah begins this presentation of principles of ethics with the phrase, Kedoshim Tihiyu, bring holiness into your life. You know, in Orthodox circles, Tova, you relate to this, you hear this, I hear this, we all hear this. Everybody's asking, what's the halacha? What's the law? What's the halacha? Right, Roseanne? That's an important question for those who are committed to the halacha. For me, it's a very important question. But I also want to ask the question, what is the kedusha? What are the values? Halacha is not just a system of doing and not doing. It's a system of values. I want to stop here, and I want to get your thoughts on this. It's please, by all means.
Rabbi, I see some hands. Tova has, okay, hold on. Let me make a list, everybody. First of all, Rabbi, I want you to know that Bev and Ted came on, as did Fern, who
Good,
we
good.
missed at the beginning.
Hi, Fern.
Let me just start making a list. Sorry, everyone. Okay, Tova's hand was up, and then I saw Estelle, and then I saw Natalie and Rita and
Ted's hands
Ted,
up. Yeah.
and who else? Who did I not see? Who did I not say? Tova, Estelle, oh, and Cindy. Okay, so I have Tova, Estelle, Natalie, Rita, Ted, and Cindy. Am I missing anybody who wanted to say something?
Okay. And if
Okay, so
more
let's
people want, we'll do.
start with
But
Tova.
Tova, please. If I'm looking down, I'm taking
You're
notes.
muted,
So
Tova.
please
Sorry, you're
excuse me.
muted. You're muted.
Yeah. I think when we say, Kadoshim Tihiyu, I think it does mean a separateness, because all humanity is created B'Tselem Elokim. But God's people are separate. And so we have laws to make us separate, as you said, kashrut and laws of morality. But I like the Ramban that you.
I'm going to ask Shuli, if we can. Maybe I can get the English Ramban. We'll send it to everyone. It really is worth looking at when Tova, when he says that his language, that one could live in a terrible way with the permission of the Torah, and therefore you need a kedoshim to you to make sure that that's not the case. The way actually it could be framed is, why do you need a separate commandment of be holy? Just follow the Torah, and by definition, you'll be holy. Yeah, because as he's saying, it's a very radical statement. You could follow the whole Torah and not be holy. Therefore, you need a specific mandate to be holy. But Tova, just to push the point a little bit on the separation, look, there are wonderful people who are not Jewish, who are beautifully ethical people. And I think we do have to ask. It's something I think about a lot. I'd like to write about it. Is our system of interpersonal relationships, interpersonal ethics, it overlaps certainly with other systems, but are there ways that they are distinct? I'll give you one way, for example, that's distinct. The one way where the ethics of Torah would be separate from many other ethical systems. The Torah says, Lo ta'amod al dam reacha, which means do not stand by as the blood of your neighbor is being spilled. So let's for a moment imagine that, let's say somebody is drowning and I know how to swim, and I am in a position to save this individual. If I don't know how to swim, that's another matter. But I know how to swim. I could save this individual and I don't. What are the consequences of my not acting? Now, in virtually every state of the Union, I think it's 48 out of the 50. Don't ask me which two it's not, but I've heard it's 48 of the 50. If one is in a position to save life and doesn't, there is no legal culpability. There is an ethical violation that one could have saved life and didn't. But it's not a legal culpability. Judaism says no. If I am in a position to help another and I don't, then I could be hauled into a court of law and found guilty. One of the famous examples going all the way back 55, 60 years was, perhaps you remember the Kitty Genovese story, a woman who was killed in front of a Queens apartment building. And I believe the story became a play called The 39th Witness. I think they documented how Kitty Genovese was screaming for help. And they documented how 38 people heard the screams, but did nothing. And it was the 39th witness who did something. But as I remember the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, this person did call the police, did call what was then 911. There probably wasn't a 911 then. But my understanding is that this person first called the police, first called his lawyer or her lawyer to find out how involved they would become if they did call the police. Now, in America, there are ethical violations. In Judaism, there are legal violations. If one stands by as Ukraine is being attacked and does nothing, that is not only a bishlav musari on an ethical level of violation, it's a much, much deeper violation. It's a legal violation. That would be an example. It's a small example, but it's an important example of one of the ways the Jewish ethical system can be distinguished from other ethical systems. And I want to put it out there for you to think about if there are others.
But
I think Estelle.
Well, this is very interesting. To go back to what you mentioned before about the covering and the reasons why is it only the man to discover the covering of the woman? Shouldn't it be in reverse too? Why is it even today? It always has the woman who has to be covered. Why not the man to be covered to discover some inner something in the man? Why is the difference?
I agree with you, and that's why I actually have been suggesting, Estelle, that as I don't know if you know this, Shuli, I've been suggesting that as the groom does the veiling, that there should be a reciprocal veiling in the form. The man doesn't wear a veil, but in the form of the bride perhaps taking a talit that she's acquired, a prayer shawl, and in wrapping, a kind of veiling, in wrapping the groom in the talit. And it has a very similar meaning because certainly in the Ashkenazic community, a man only wears a talit, and a woman could wear a talit if she so wishes, of course, but a man only wears a talit when they're married, or the talit is also a symbol of protection. I'm protecting you. It's also, when you pray with the prayer shawl, some people put it over their heads. That is a counterpart, and we've been doing this, Estelle. Some bride and groom prefer that the bride give to the groom a kittel, the white garment, but what you have shared is something that people have noticed and are trying to correct.
But isn't that contradictory to what really happens under the chuppah, where the man takes this woman?
Right.
I mean, she becomes his exclusively.
That also is
what?
That also is being changed, isn't it? You take each other.
Right. Well, I think right.
All right.
But Tova has raised the issue that, in the end, the kiddushin is that the husband does the betrothing and the bride is the one who is betrothed. And there are women who struggle with that, who take exception to that. That actually is a piece that I'm able to say now in my rabbinate that bothers me, but I'm committed to it. I'm committed to the way it's been done all the way back in Sinai. But what we try to do is to compensate. And so, for example, the bride gives a ring to the groom often after the nisuin. It's not the statement of betrothal, Topher, but there are attempts to balance it out. And there are now actually, Tova, there's a text that I once saw that Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, Rabbi Soloveitchik's son-in-law, wrote, in which the ketubah, which basically lays out the husband's responsibility to provide for the wife, that it is complemented by the reverse, the wife's responsibilities. So, but Tova, in terms of the narrow piece of the betrothal, you're absolutely right, but that's something that even someone in the very open wing of Orthodoxy, that's something halachically, I want to make sure they're halachically married, that I have little and I have no latitude there.
But Avi, until a wife can initiate the get, then she certainly is not equal legally.
Well, actually, Tova, we're a little bit off topic, but it's fine. But a wife could initiate. Tova, you're right that there was a long time that, look, the get has gone through. Maybe we should have discussions on this. There was a time when the husband could indiscriminately divorce his wife, just like that. Maybe it was because in ancient times, the feeling was a woman would never want to be divorced because she was so vulnerable because of society then, so she would always want a man to protect her.
But also the husband in ancient times had more than one wife. How did he manage that?
Right.
Yeah, well, let me just take it one step at a time. The second step, Tova, was that the rabbi said, wait a minute, something's wrong with that. It shouldn't be that way. So they introduced the marital contract. And the marital contract is worth a lot of money. It's there are differences of opinion of what it's worth, but it's worth something. In America, it's not worth anything because of separation of church and state. But so if you want to divorce your wife, you better think about it because it's going to cost you. And the third step was the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershon, that a get could not be given without the acceptance of the wife. She had to be fully, willingly be prepared to receive the get. If she would not be willing to receive the get could not be given. And the fourth step was that the wife could actually initiate the divorce proceedings by going to the court, to the Bet Din, and introduce his claims. And if the claims are accepted, then he could be subpoenaed. And Kofino Toache Yoma Rotsani, they could actually coerce him until he says, I'll give the get. And that is the law of the land in Israel. It's not the law in America, which is the problem. But in Israel, it is the law of the land that the Bet Din could demand that the husband give the get. So, and what were you saying, Estelle? You jumped in with a point.
What if the husband had more than one wife, as it was in ancient times?
Well, it's not that way now, thank God. And even in ancient times, it was, I'd like to think that that's not something that was preferred. The Daf Yomi, which I'm learning these days, is in Yevamot. And Yevamot talks about a man married to two women. And you know what the women are called? They're called Sarot, Tsaras. And there's good reason, because they're Tsaras to each other. And even in the Bible, we won't find one polygamous marriage that worked out. There was always tension. Sarah did not get along famously with Hagar, and the wives of Jacob did not get along very, very well with each other. And Hannah and Penina, Hannah, the mother of Samuel, did not get along with Penina. And the Bible, right in the beginning, says, Al ken yazov ish et aviv et imo v'davak bishto. Therefore, a man will leave his parents and cleave to his wife, right there in chapter 2. In chapter 2, sentence 18, right around there, to cleave to his wife. That's really the ideal. But society then had men marrying many women. And so it took time to wean off that, but that, thank God, is, of course, not the way it is, not the way it should be, and it's not the way it is. I'm talking too much. I want to listen. Yeah. So first I see Sue Rudnick is on. That's so nice. It's great to see you, Sue. There were some others who wanted to say a word.
Yes, so we had, hold on, let me just scroll up. So Tova and Estelle spoke, so Natalie is next.
One of the things I wanted to notice is that when you talk about marriages, you talk about people who love one another. But most of the marriages were arranged marriages. And the reason I think the possibility for the waiting 1 year was because the bride was usually very young. And they probably waited the year for her to develop as a woman.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that may be one of the
Yes.
reasons that they waited a year.
Yes, I hear that, Natalie. I think that's very true. When you read the Talmud is the Talmud's beautiful, but some of it is very, very painful. And it talks about young women
And the
getting
reason
married,
that
which is,
they have a few moments together is because they probably didn't even know each other, the
yeah,
bride and the groom. And they
Yeah.
have a few moments to just to get to know one another.
right. Yeah, look, when you look at the Bible, Natalie, there were in Sefer Breshit, there were two types of shidduchim. Shidduchim means matches. One match was when Rebecca is brought to Isaac. They just met each other. There it was. That's what you're describing, Natalie. Do you remember when she was brought, Rebecca, from Abraham's hometown? That was like a shidduch. But then when you read a little further, it tells us the story of Jacob. That's a real love story where it's sort of the more contemporary way where he.
Well, the Bible mentions that because it's unusual, I think, for them to be love matches.
Right. Yeah. Although I just throw this out there for your consideration. I don't know which is the better way these days, because there are a lot of people who.
One more thing I wanted to say, Rabbi.
Please, Natalie.
Is in my own personal life, sometimes when somebody did something that either hurt me or was wrong, I carried a grudge. I carried within me a feeling of dislike. And when I let that go, I felt holy.
I love that,
because
Natalie.
I realized that person isn't even aware of my feelings. I'm carrying this burden. And when I let go of the burden, then I felt holy.
Thank you. I bless you for that. It's if a person is able to do that, that's great. And to let go of anger we have at someone, upset with someone, jealousy of someone. I heard Rabbi Twersky of blessed memory say that, and actually I've been told that it's been said by many, but I heard it from him, so I want to mention his name, that he says that if you still bear a grudge, Natalie, against somebody, and then that person is occupying your head and the rent is free. That's the thing. It's, and therefore, if you can overcome that, you do feel like you can breathe a sigh of relief. If you can do that, it's not, it takes a lot of strength to be able to do that, but I think that really is the goal. Shuli, is Ted up next?
Rita and then Ted.
Okay.
Rita, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay, Rabbi, what I wanted to say was that I find your talks inspiring for how to live an ethical and religious life And I really appreciate it, and I look forward to it every week. So thank you.
Thank you, Rita. I fall short in following through on it, but we're all on a journey, and we're all reaching to do better. And that gives me an opportunity, Rita. First of all, thank you for being on, and it means so much to me, so much to me. You have no idea. This is, as I've told you many times, is like the eye in the storm. This class, learning from each other. I did want to mention that there's another term, spiritual. There's an observant person. Generally, for example, when Joe Lieberman was running for vice president and he identified himself as an observant is generally understood as he's ritually observant. He's ritually observant. And then there's the religious person. The religious deals with somebody who is very sensitive to interpersonal ethics. And I think you can be a religious person even if you don't keep Shabbat or whatever. You could be religious and not observant, as we've said, and observant and not religious. But there's another term, and that is spiritual. Spiritual means to connect with God, from my perspective. And I think you could be religious and observant and not be spiritual. And God may not be part of that dimension. And ultimately, the goal, I think, is to tripod, to try to bring it together if one can. Although I would argue that even if one is not formally spiritual and bringing God into your life, if I act properly to my fellow person, then I am following God's mandate, and that is a form of spirituality too. God works through people. When we give to others, that is a form of that part of God in us, and us as human beings giving to the other is an aspect of spirituality.
Rabbi, at 11 o'clock, the physical therapist comes in, and I have to go now for the physical therapy.
Great.
So
Please.
I have to go
And Rita, I want to bless you, make it a holy experience. Even physical therapy can be holy.
Okay, thank
And
you. I'll try.
My
Thank
dear
you.
friend and
But
Rebbe.
Really, your classes are special to me.
Thank you.
Thank
Ted,
you.
my dear Rebbe, Ted, you have the last word. Yeah, off mute. Bev, do you mind? Can't hear.
But he
Okay,
said, okay.
He said okay.
Now we can hear you.
So the first, my first point, I don't need to really repeat, because Estelle raised that issue far more eloquently than I could. And that was that it seemed to me there was a bit of misogyny involved in the woman being required to wear a veil, but the man was not.
Yes.
And that was symbolic of many other things. So that, I think, you very much responded to. And my second point is this, that the Bible refers to avoiding, as it does in the Torat, extreme examples of what not to do. In other words, it gives you extreme examples of what is moral behavior, and that there's so many ways to violate decency that the Bible could go on for pages and pages, more than it already includes, if you're going to list every single negative thing that a person is capable of doing. So my thought is that if you exclude the most serious violation of something ethical, then you're probably not going to be a person who will do other less significant violations. I'll give you an analogy. You know, at my age and even earlier, you don't want to accumulate. You want to begin to distribute things. So I gave some of the things that were most important to me away, first of all. And my daughter Julia said, wow, referring to some of these items, these are really important things to you. How come you're giving them away first and now? And my response to her was that if I can give away my most valuable possessions, it'll be a lot easier to give away
That's valuable.
that which is less important. So that was my point. The Bible can't list every single negative thing not to do and to avoid if you're neglecting to do, if you're avoiding doing the most serious ethical violations.
It's so eloquent, Ted. Also the language is so beautiful where you're saying that you distribute rather than accumulate. It's that's really beautiful, Ted. Thank you. It's beautiful, beautiful insight.
I
Yes, please.
say something,
Okay.
and it's a
Then
little.
I'm sure Ezra's on, so really, Ted and Bev, the last word. Yes.
Okay, I would like to just say something that's a little like a thorn in what you are saying.
Please.
And that is, it's always been a deep interest to me is when did anti-Semitism start? What was the beginning that
Pharaoh.
all the nations then increased and, into finally the horrors of the Holocaust? But when did anti-Semitism begin? And I read a book on it or books on it and essays, and it was always went back to separation, way back to the Roman times, that the Jews separated and therefore was suspicious. And that the suspicion evolved to fear. And that from that grew anti-Semitism. And it started way back, not with Christianity, way back in Roman times when Jews were mandated to be separated and to do things separate. And that's scary to other people.
I jotted this down. And what I jotted down was your formula is that when you separate, it leads to suspicion.
Absolutely.
Suspicion to fear and anti-Semitism. So you're offering, so that's a rationale as to why we have been so victimized.
Well, that I'm sure it's not as simple as that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that everything is very complex, but that seemed to be one aspect of where anti-Semitism began. And the price one pays for separation.
Yeah.
That is a reason. That is a reason. Therefore, they said Jewish, that the Jews took blood from, they didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. they could attribute anything, even the blood libel. They could attribute anything at that to that.
Right.
And so that was a reason to persecute. So it's very, separation, we talk about that, and it's very good in some ways that we have separated. We become a community that way, and we're not so diverse and spread out. And on the other hand, there's the flip side.
Right. It's a great point. And look, one of the issues that continue to be discussed is the balance between separation and being part of the larger community. And some have argued if we don't have a particularism, will we lose our Jewish identity, lose it completely? And so, yeah, no, look, I hear what you're saying, Bev. And just one, I saw Judy wanted to say a word. My dear Judy, thank you so much, Bev. Is Judy on, Judy Stieglitz?
I think I was supposed to be next.
Yeah,
Oh,
Judy
Judy.
wrote her question in the chat actually, but yeah, we do have Cindy and we have
Okay. Ezra is
Fern.
on deck, so I don't want to take.
I'll just
To it.
put this out real quickly
Please.
because I posit that the separation, at least in my understanding, is two conditions. One is the awareness of Hashem, and the other is the lack of awareness of Hashem. So when we are holy, it is when we bring our awareness of Hashem into whatever we do, because we are charged to behave in the image of Hashem, which I believe is the 13 attributes. And so how do we do that? How do we make everything that we do be a reflection of the attributes of Hashem? And how do we bring that awareness? And I think that the rituals that we do and the commandments that we do are all designed to make us be in a state of awareness of Hashem versus the lack of awareness or the concealment.
It's beautiful. It's I've always said when people consider joining us, the class, I always say, please, you can join my class, but what stands out is not what I have to say, it's what everybody has to say. And it's great comments. And just I thank you. Did Judy, do you want to read her question, Shuli?
She had a comment. Let me read it. I just saw it. My question is, during the class, Ravavi alluded to the dictate of social interaction according to Kedoshim TU. Should we live insular lives, not interacting with non-Jews and even non-Orthodox Jews? Maybe the Haredim got it right.
Yeah, that'll be for, this is what Bev was hinting at. And that's a big discussion.
The last person who didn't get to speak was Fern.
Okay, Fern, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Where are we going today, Fern?
Well, today's my first day out of quarantine, so I don't know yet. I have to decide. Too many good choices. But quickly, I follow the Rebbe's Choice, which is a herring company, believe it or not. They also make other food products, but they, on their social media page, they post every day, every night, the Omer that you count for that night. Mm-hmm. And last night, they discussed the holiness of the mundane. Don't forget about the mundane, because there's holiness in a person, there's holiness in a rock. Every little thing you look at, everything you do and touch, there's holiness in. It may seem mundane and not important, but it is important, and there is holiness in everything. You just have to dig deep to find it.
Right, beautiful. You know, the mystics look at the term yesh me'ayin, and they say every yesh, everything that is suffused with the ayin, with the Ein Sof. It's really beautiful comment. Ezra, what do you think? What is
Rabbi,
holiness?
I just would like to say today is
Yeah.
Ted's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Hey,
92
happy birthday,
years
Ted.
old, so maybe a blessing would be in order.
Yeah. Well, first let's all join together. Hayom Yom Huledet. Hayom Yom Huledet. Hayom Yom Huledet. Idi Ted. Ted,
Thank
I
you,
just want to bless
everybody.
you.
And
Ted.
thank you, Beverly, for mentioning it. I was
Ted,
so intrigued by the lesson. I forgot it was my birthday.
Ted, I just want to bless you. You mean so much to me. We go back so many decades. When I first met you, you were at the Chavurah in Connecticut, and you really are the pillars, become pillars and staples of the Bayit. And I've learned so much from you, Ted, from you, Bev. Just my blessing, Yimalei Adonai Kol Mishalot Libecha. All your wishes, God should grant for many more years, Ted.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Ezra, what do you think? Kadoshim to you? I heard, I've not read it yet, but I've heard from a few people that Ezra wrote a beautiful piece today in the daily email. So I'm eagerly looking forward to read it. A few people tell me that is.
Thank
So,
you. Anything I have on about Kedoshim to you, I've really learned from this chevra because we've discussed Kedoshim to you a number of times over the years, the idea of Kedusha. And I remember before COVID, we once sat at the table in the lobby and everybody went around and shared an experience where they felt a sense of holiness.
wow,
Where
beautiful.
they tapped into that place of feeling something beyond themselves, or like God was speaking to them, or there was something magical about their existence. And I think that that's a universal experience. It doesn't always happen in the same. For some people, it's nature. For some people, that happens in the context of family. For some people, that happens in the context of ritual. And yet everybody, when pushed on it, is able to articulate, was able to share a personal story. And to me, that was the holiest class of all. And something that Kedoshim to you gets at is like being in touch with those experiences and honoring
Thank
them.
you. It's a great way for me, very belatedly, to say good morning to everyone. Just love you all. Take care of yourselves, everyone. And we're going to Israel, so we'll let you know when, but I hope to continue doing the class. So 10 o'clock here is 5 p.m. in Israel, and I'm looking forward to it. Ellen, take care, everybody. All my love to everybody. Ruby, be well. Refuah shlema. God bless
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, for those staying for Danielle, we're going to start at 11:35. 11:35.
Thank you.
So take a few minutes if you need.
Ev, I just wanted to say that the Germans before the Holocaust were some of the most assimilated people there were.
And
I wish it was just separatism. I think it's more, I don't know what it is, but I think it's more than that.
both Mom and I always.
It may be just the seeds.
At
It
the
may
Yeah.
be,
end of the
you know,
book,
once you start something, you just keep